I am Vinnie Tortorich, and folks, your good intentions have been stolen, but don't worry. I'm here to help you get them back. Maybe soft and succulent at the beginning of this process, but hang in there. Before long, you will be lean and mean, guaranteed, just like the woman on the other mic. She's been here several times before, probably on the Friday show, the Luminary show, maybe more than anyone else. And to be honest with you, if I can drug her and get her in here every single Friday, I would. I find any reason whatsoever to get this woman on. I'm in love with her. Serena's even said to me, if I wasn't here, it's like, oh yeah, if somehow you fell off of a cliff, honey, and I don't know, Nina's husband was in a helicopter accident, I would be in New York right now. And that's just, wow. I love this woman that much. Nina Teicholz. How you doing, Pumpkin?
That's quite an introduction, Vinny. But thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here with you.
But, it's better than when I used to do the Gary Taubes, Nina Teicholz introduction.
I know. We don't need to go over that.
For both of you. I used to do that to him, too, in the opposite way.
I understand.
So, folks, if you want to go back and listen to those gems of a podcast, feel free to. Let me tell you guys the sad part about this show and what's happening today. Nina and I just did 20 minutes without mics on. And that's actually the show. That's the show we should do, but we can't. Right? Right, Nina? I mean, when you think
pretty
about
much. Yeah. I mean, we were talking about shadow banning of people who are talking about low carb diets, anyone who mentions that meat might be healthy, the kind of the sort of shadow censorship that is going on most major social media platforms, or people being removed from Wikipedia, including Vinny. I mean, it's really shocking, actually, what's going on. And of course, we have no control over it. And it's not a stated policy on anywhere that I've seen. So you're fighting against this intangible enemy that is out there. But it is a story. It is a story. I don't think anybody's really written about it.
No, and when people do write about it, they get in trouble. Or I can't remember what it was called, but it was just a few months ago where they started like another type of Twitter. I can't remember what it was. I do remember it was considered more of Twitter for RightWing.
Right. I don't know what that is.
I can't remember what it was, but they started this whole thing saying, hey, they were calling it RightWing Twitter, but basically it was this other group that said, hey, come over here and you can say whatever you want. We won't, look, if you do the running into a crowded theater and yelling fire, of course we will censor that, but you can have an opinion here. You can say whatever you want. We won't censor you for an opinion. And somehow Google got involved and said, hey, we're going to deplatform this. And the whole thing went away. Right. So we're doing that kind of thing, too, which is really scary because this is going to get into what we're talking about today. This is really scary territory. What say you?
Well, ideally, I'd like to have platforms where people on the right and the left can speak to each other. It does no one any good to be separated into camps that are not speaking to each other. Not that necessarily people learn so much from each other on Twitter. It's often just hostile arguments where no ground is granted. But I think it's still important that people be able to see each other's viewpoints. And Twitter is obviously deplatforming a lot of views it doesn't agree with, and some of the tend to be more conservative. But I think even that is changing. So yeah, obviously you need to be a lot more careful, and everybody I know feels like we are entering into some kind of 1984 territory where you have to self-censor. And that is true of my liberal friends and my conservative friends. So that's not good for the health of democracy in the country. I mean, I'm not an expert in this field, but it is obviously not good for rational discussion and for our to repair the polarization that is going on.
Yeah, Nina's younger than me, but we're both. You're in your 50s, right, Nina?
Yes, I
Yes.
am.
We grew up in a time, and maybe I'm putting words in Nina's mouth, but I didn't realize there was a big difference growing up. I grew up in the deep South. One of my parents, and I won't say which is which because I don't want people to hate one and like the other. One of them is a Democrat and the other one's a Republican. They're fine with that. Um, I, all of our friends were either Republicans or Democrats. Everyone went out to dinner. Everyone had crawfish boils together. Everyone went hunting and fishing together and went to football games together. There was no, now we live in a world, and I really do think social media has a lot to do with it, where if you're on this side, the other side is absolutely wrong. And, if you're on the left, the right the right should go away. And if you're on the right, the left, they're insane and they should go away. And this should not be. As I explained to a friend of mine, the one thing that allows you to be who you are and what you do also allows the other guy to be who he is and what he does. And you can both have an opinion. That's the great thing about the United States. If not, we become a communist state. If the Democrats want to see the Republicans go away as a party, that's a problem. If the Republicans want to see the Democrats go away as a party, that's a problem, because now you become just one party, and you might as well just go straight to communism.
Right, or authoritarianism, I think is maybe a better term. Yeah. Like just, a kind of a regime where there is intolerance of any non-regime opinions, whatever that is. But I think, the tragedy, I mean, we're going to talk about the subject that we normally talk about, but the tragedy really is that science is getting caught up in these crosshairs over the last few years, whereby if you have an opinion on anything that has to do with science, it has quickly become affiliated with one's political leanings. And that is very possibly the worst contaminant of science. Science is just science. It's just data. It's just evidence. And it should be debated. It evolves. It has to be opinions about it, have to be flexible, and should not be aligned with your politics. So we're seeing this, in many areas of science now, but you're seeing it in nutrition. I think principally around the subject of meat and whether we should be eating meat or eat a vegetarian vegan diet in order to, one, save the planet, so the climate concerns that surround the production of beef, but also for your health. And these have become political positions now. And I think this was consciously manipulated, whereby red meat was seen as almost a symbol of the conservatives, red states. They don't care about the environment. They're climate deniers. Also, they don't really care about health. They don't care about the health of anybody. And so they're all barbecuing steaks with little regard for any of our higher ideals. And then there are, in the progressive camp, there's this idea that we really should all go vegan, and that's the responsible thing to do to save the planet. So that is, and everybody's very hardened into their positions, especially on the left, in this case. I think that Republicans, unless they're cattle farmers, don't really have a strong opinion, and probably most people, think, according to their doctors, that red meat is bad for them. So, but it's really a tragedy because the science truly does not support any of those positions, and our inability to get down to the actual science is very, very limited. I mean, or the response of well-meaning progressives to that science, which is to basically turn a blind ear to them, to the science itself, is deeply disturbing. I think it really is a sort of a crisis of policy, and in our country. Let me just give you one example, which is that in New York City, recently, our new mayor, Eric Adams, whom I think he's excellent in many things that he's done since he's come in, but he recently decided to make vegan Fridays for school children. Okay, so these children already have Meatless Mondays where they don't get meat. Meatless Mondays is a group that is supported by some 34, 35 food companies that all stand to benefit if you remove meat, right? It's the beans, the pasta, it's a corporate supported group. So we have Meatless Mondays, now we have Vegan Fridays. I wrote an op-ed about this that appeared in the New York Daily News, and I spoke about how the vegan diet, which they're not only imposing on children, but by their actions, they're encouraging them and their families to adopt this diet because of the language around this choice. So you're encouraging children to go vegan when there is really solid evidence to show that diet does not provide the nutrients that are needed for growth, healthy growth and development, and for life. And this is hardcore evidence that is not disputed by anybody. You cannot find vitamins B12 in plant foods. You cannot get the proper form of omega-3. You can't get the proper form of vitamin A. You cannot get complete proteins, or they come much, much higher, many more calories. Children need complete proteins. And I pointed out in this op-ed that this this incredible experiment that was done in Africa on school children, where they fed them a small portion of meat during the day at school compared to kids who got the same amount of calories as other food or as dairy. And the kids with the meat did better on their academic scores. They did better in testing. They did better on the playground. They showed more assertiveness, more leadership, and more activity. And this was just a small supplement of meat. So at the very least, you would think that the mayor's office in New York City would be concerned. Like, what if, in Belgium, a vegan diet is, you can go to jail. You can go to jail if you are a parent feeding your child a vegan diet, because that diet will not promote, or there's just enough instances where the children have not thrived on that diet or died.
Yeah.
But there's been no response at all to my op-ed or to any of these ideas, or no concerned parents, nothing. I see no response.
Well, but they don't respond on either side. They just take it as, okay, I guess this is what we're doing. And I think to a lot of just average people, vegan, they think it sounds healthy. We grew up, every sitcom growing up had a joke about meat in it. It's like, hey, I'll have the ribeye with a side of cardiologist. That was on every sitcom. It's like, oh my God, if I eat that, I will die. I'll break,
Right. Heart attack on a plate.
Yeah. We've been talking about this for eons. And now we have people, I said it in the last election, the last presidential election, it was very scary to me when I kind of got it when Cory Booker was talking about it. So this is in the primaries, right? When they were trying to figure out who was going to run against Trump. So there wasn't much talk on the right. So I don't know what those guys would have said anyway. But on the left, since they were trying to figure out who was going to run against Trump, Cory Booker, who's a devout vegan, was saying, yeah, if I become president, of course, we're going to make everything vegan, because that's what he believes in. I actually kind of respect that, because this is who the guy is. But then you have Kamala Harris, when she got asked, and I put it in my movie, Beyond Impossible, what do you think about meat? And she was like, yeah, I think it should go away. We should, because she was saying what she thought, and by the way, this is no slight on Kamala Harris. This is just politicians being politicians. Right? They will say whatever they think the constituency wants to hear. Right?
Yeah.
And, she does it with that stupid laugh that she does afterwards, which allows you to know that she has no idea what she's talking about, and she doesn't really mean it. As to Kamala Harris, I didn't mean that laugh. but that's what she did. And a few other ones did that whole, we're going to have more meatless Mondays and we're going to pull meat out and we're going to do. So it's being talked about as policy. And I'm sitting here going, I want my policy makers to be making policies that matter to the United States. We have an infrastructure problem. We have an obesity problem that's killed more people than COVID. Sorry, folks, but it has, and it's going to continue to, right? And there's no fucking mask you could put on that's going to stop obesity. Oh, that's right. It didn't really stop COVID either, did it? But that's where we are with all this stuff. Or am I wrong, Nina?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about nutrition policy, I think nutrition policy still really matters. I think, and the attitude that you hear from everybody and not just politicians is, why not just get rid of meat? What is the point? Why don't we just do this? What is the argument against it? And I saw that in the media, starting to be, echoed in the media, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. It started to be asked, why not just get rid of meat? We all know that meat is bad for us. Why not? That became, the public consciousness had shifted such that it was like, this is just disposable. And nobody was making the counter arguments. And you still can't find the counter arguments. You still can't find those articles and those speeches about it. Nobody will say, oh, you know what? There's another side to this argument. There's another side. Oh, there's all that nutrition in meat, and it's low calorie, and it doesn't have any glucose, so it doesn't have any effect on your blood sugar. And now we understand that the ups and downs of the spikes in blood sugar is really what drives diabetes, if not also obesity. And we understand about that sugar problem in our blood. Okay, so here's a protein that won't drive your sugar up and has a whole bunch of nutrients that are shortfall nutrients, many of them in the United States. So it means we don't get enough of them already. Where's that argument, right? Where's the argument that, the arguments on the other side about climate change, why we keep, there's so many, it's such a complexity of arguments that surround that whole issue. We just can't even get into them. But I think that what you see is just one-sided conversation, which is just so disturbing. I mean, I think the larger issue is somewhat this, which is that there is a kind of a silencing of science, going back to our point about shadow banning and what's happening on social media. But there is just an absolute silencing of the science that has happened. So. And now we're really in an area where it's not just social media, and it's really happening at the level of public health organizations that we would want to trust, like the American Heart Association.
Right.
They have literally, let's just take this subject of saturated fats, right? That was launched by the American Heart Association in 1961, telling everybody to cut back on saturated fats. Well, for a long time, no one questioned that. And then in the last 20 years, there's now more than 20 review papers all saying, hey, we got it wrong on saturated fats. We missed the date, the rigorous clinical trial data. Here it is. This is what it says. It says that saturated fats have no effect on cardiovascular mortality, total mortality, and in the vast majority of cases, no effects on heart attacks or anything. The American Heart Association, which was supposed to be like right out there on top of this, this is their right. field. They ignore all those papers. In their most recent sort of lifestyle statement, consensus statement, which has maybe 60 authors on it, they talk about saturated fats. They say, oh, we're quoting our decision from 2016, just 4 years earlier. Okay, so we'll just miss out on the last 4 years of science. Go back to 2016, you look at that paper. That paper doesn't quote any of the 18 papers on saturated fats that had come out during that time. I mean, they're literally just saying this science does not exist. The papers never came out. It doesn't exist. We are pretending, we are erasing that historical record. We are erasing science. We're not reckoning with it and saying it's wrong, which is what, an honest science, even if an honest or a dishonest scientist might try to manipulate the facts to look different than they are. But they're not even doing that. They're just saying we are going to pretend it doesn't exist. And everybody everybody seems to go along with this.
Well, all right. So Nina, for anyone who maybe don't know who Nina Teicholz is, and you would have to be under a rock not to, but Nina wrote a book. I want to say it was 8 years ago now, 10 years. How long has it been out?
2014. So
8 years.
Yeah.
So
it has been a long time.
Big Fat Surprise came out. And I'm going to give you guys a little background on what Nina did. And Nina, if I misspeak here, please jump in. But Nina did a weird thing. She was a vegetarian, and she was tasked by a magazine or a publication of some sort to go out and do a study and figure out why the vegan diet or vegetarian diet or something thereof.
No, it was about trans fats.
Trans fats and why they're bad.
Right. And now, yeah.
And so she does this, and she figures out, even though she was a vegetarian you were still a vegetarian at that point, right, Nina?
Yeah. So this is the early 2000s, correct?
Right. So she goes and she starts reading, and her dad's a big time scientist, and she comes from a family of scientists and all that. And she looks around and goes, wait a minute. The same papers that they're saying this is coming from, you can also look at those same papers and figure out that this other truth happens to be there. And did you ever write that article, or did you just go in to start writing your book? Tell that story, because the truth is stranger than fiction here. And you have to read this book, folks. If you have not read it yet, I would tell you to read it and also get it on audio so you can listen to it a second time, because you may miss stuff just using your reading ability, where you might hear something when you hear it on Audible. Go on, Nina.
Well, thank you for that. But it was, my original story was for Gourmet magazine on trans fats. That did get published in, I think, 2003. The editor of that magazine, Ruth Reichel, in her autobiography says it's one of the stories she's most proud to have published, because she got so much pushback. She was afraid of losing some of her biggest advertisers, which included Procter & Gamble, the maker of Crisco oil.
Right.
And my story had been all about how these vegetable oils turned out not to be very good for you, and that how industry had suppressed and stifled the science by literally hiring people to go intimidate and yell at lecturers and conferences. I mean, the stories are lurid and unbelievable, but you realize what a bullying culture exists in science. In nutrition science, at least. Right. Anyway, so that story did get published, and then it put me down the rabbit hole on dietary fat, which is just a deep, rich, interesting topic involved. I read thousands of papers, interviewed hundreds of nutrition scientists from all over the world, and I came out with my book, which really is the first comprehensive critique for a general audience of why saturated fats are okay to eat. Like, how did we get it wrong? And why is it that they are actually okay to eat? What is the history of how this idea about saturated fats and why we don't eat red meat and why we eat low-fat dairy, how did that come to be? And the other side of that story, which I think my book was also the first to do, is to really tell the story of what replaced saturated fats, which was polyunsaturated industrial vegetable oils previously used to lubricate machinery, and how they came into the American food supply such that they're the biggest increase in a foodstuff over the course of the last 100 years. Why are we eating former machine lubricant as our so-called healthy fats? Like, what is that? Now that's just become this huge burgeoning field of interest, and there are numerous people who are circling around that topic, which is great because it needs attention. But yeah. I think, my book was really the first that laid all that out. So it was, controversial. It still remains like this. I think I still get all the time people telling me that this was their introduction to the topic and how they went down their own rabbit holes. And it is something, once you know about it and you see it, you can't unsee it. And partially that's because it causes people to change their diets and they get healthy. I mean, this is something well. People understand, like, they can't understand air pollution or do their own experiments or have their own opinion about, I mean, let's just to take the hot topic of vaccines, very hard to understand, get your mind around, lots of conflicting opinions. You don't want to touch it. But when it comes to your own body, if you're losing weight, feeling better, sleeping better, in a better mood, everybody can do their own experiment. And so I think that's what really how this particular understanding of the science really lives on, because it's founded in a reality that people can themselves confirm. And if we're wrong, people would give it a try and have bad results, and that would be the end of it. I'd be in the my book would be in the dustbin of history, but it's not.
Well, I talk often to my friend Dr. Drew about this, and I talk to a lot. It's like, look, back when I was just training people in Hollywood, my trade secret was, hey, you need to lose weight. Usually, one of the biggest people always say to me, what are some of the biggest, people you transform for a movie? It's like, well, most of my work wasn't actually for a movie. Most of it was for after a movie. So for instance, actresses, what they do, is they film a movie and then they schedule getting pregnant right after that so they can have a kid while they're in a downtime. But, it takes a movie a good year, 12 months to come out. Meanwhile, they became a mommy and they don't look the way they looked when they filmed the movie, right? And part of their job with the studio or whoever the producers or the producers of the movie is, hey, we're going to give you millions of dollars because of your acting ability, but we need you to go out and promote this when it comes out. Now they have to go out and promote, and they don't look the same. They have post-pregnancy weight. That's when Vinnie would get the phone call, hey, we need to get so-and-so. They were red carpet ready. We need to get her back looking like she looked in the movie. And I would go, okay, how much time? And I would go 6 weeks. And I would just go, you got to be kidding me. Couldn't you have called me 3 months ago? You knew this was coming.
Right.
6 weeks. It's just that they don't want to pay Vinnie that much, right? Because the longer Vinnie stays there, the more they have to pay me, right?
Right.
So, okay, I have 6 weeks. I would go in, and Nina, I would hear this every time. I would get them off of all carbs, any kind of carbs whatsoever, things like cassava and arrowroot and all this crap and monk fruit. None of that existed back then, right? It was just, hey, here's what you have to do. We're eating bacon and eggs for breakfast. You're eating red meat. You're eating fish. And they would all say the same thing to me. Well, I guess 6 weeks of doing this won't kill me, right? They felt like they were going, they called it, a lot of my clients called it going over to the dark side. That's where I got that phrase from. It's like, okay, I'll go over to the dark side with you for 6 weeks. I'm going to look great for the movie, for the premiere and walking down the red carpet and everything else, and for the junkets and everything else I have to do. 6 weeks won't kill me, right? That was the attitude. And my question was always, okay, I have you looking like a teenager again, yet you're going to stop doing this because you think it's killing you? Do you? And by the way, some of them would come along for the long ride, but others would go back to their crazy lifestyle, whatever that was.
But I don't understand, as you do have such an imperative to be slim as an actor or an actress, why they would not. I mean, I look at actors and actresses today and I can see what a difficult time they're having keeping their silhouettes. I mean, some of them really look terrible to me, and I don't know. I mean, that's fine. It's obviously they're still working, but I just wonder. I mean, mainly it's that I wonder why people don't trust their own eyes, and that is, or their own experience in their body. They don't trust it. Shows you the power of the mind and why propaganda is so powerful. I mean, what we have is a tremendous amount, many vested interests behind a propaganda campaign that I can only kind of see the edges of, but you see the results of, which are op-eds and movies and all kinds of, like, just an endless tide of misinformation on nutrition and disease. Not to mention that our dietary guidelines are wrong and not based on good science. So, I mean, it doesn't have to be a propaganda campaign. It starts at the top. But then how is it that somebody is so disconnected to their own experience that they can deny it? I think the power of the mind is extraordinary.
Well, let's go to the woman I live with, my wife. When we first met, Serena, you know, everyone famously knows her as an actress. But before she was an actress, starting in the late 70s, she was a model in Europe. And her generation, Serena's my age, I'm 59, she's 60. Her generation came off of Twiggy. So that, you know, you're in Europe and you're a major model in the late 70s going into the 80s. You have to be lean. You have to be thin. They're still living off of the Twiggy days, right? And I said to Serena, I said, what was it like back then? She said, I said, what was the diet? And she said, well, a bunch of us girls, after a day of shooting, we would go sit in a French restaurant and smoke a cigarette, because back in those days, you could smoke a cigarette in a restaurant. And we would smoke a cigarette and stare at a salad. That's what they did. You know, it was like we would just white knuckle everything and just try not to eat and just, you know, smoke and not eat and do whatever we can to look a certain way. Now, Serena has the body type. You've met her. She's very lean. She's very thin. But when I came on the scene around 2007, she's looking at me going, how do you stay so lean? You put heavy whipping cream in your coffee and you seem to eat meat like there's no tomorrow. And then she started remembering how she grew up, because she grew up in Europe, right? And it was always bacon and eggs for breakfast. There was always, you know, eat your meat. How can you have any pudding if you don't eat your meat? You know, they put it in songs there. And, you know, she was like, oh my God, of course, this is what we did. And she slowly started she wasn't a vegan or a vegetarian, but she always ate white meat chicken, egg white omelets, you know, all of the stuff, you know, staying away from fat.
Right.
And she had also gotten into running. That's how I met her. I met her at a Starbucks. She was coming from a run. I was coming from a bike ride. And we had a mutual friend who introduced us. This is a woman who was trying to stay lean by, hey, I'm taking up running now. And, you know, just always white knuckling it and eating low fat, but eating lean protein. I come along and explain, hey, you want to have better runs? You want to be, better, you know, all the way around? You want to feel healthier? You don't want to feel lightheaded? Do this. This is the woman who I was in love with and was in love with me. I think she's still in love with me. I'm not really sure. But she slowly turned, and it took her a year, maybe a year and a half, before she really got into putting heavy whipping cream in her coffee and having, you know, a marbled steak versus, you know, just a filet because it's leaner. You know, it was like little baby steps. And this is the person who's living with me. Right? Can you imagine what it's like for someone who you have to just go, hey, you've never met me before, but do this, right? It's not going to just take. It's not going to take. We have too many years of the food pyramid. We have too many years of the 7-country study. We have too many years of dietitians saying, this is how you do it, even though it doesn't work at all. Just keep doing the wrong thing. I'm talking to a guy right now with a brain tumor. And he's at Sloan Kettering right down the street from you. And this guy is telling me, you know, he's talking to me because he wants to keep the brain, you know, they cut it out, but now they have to do chemo. And I'm saying, look, you need to cut out grains. You need to cut out sugar. And he goes, well, my dietitian at Sloan Kettering is telling me that you're wrong. And I just throw my hands up and go, I'm not a doctor. Listen to them. I don't know what else to tell you. Right?
Yeah. Well, Yeah, you can send. I have some literature on glioblastomas, which is brain cancer,
That's exactly what he
and
does.
and yeah, I mean the expert community in that field actually is shifting for that type of cancer, but the dietitian may not be on board herself.
Well,
Yeah, I
he's
mean, I
saying,
think that, what we have is doctors are some of the most trusted people in society. We don't want to challenge these trusted officials. Eating is something that most of us do 3 times a day. It's more than anybody prays or goes to church. So it's more than a religion in terms of the way that it has entwined itself into a person's life, and it's embedded in somebody's culture, in their value system. We talked about how meat has become politicized, so that food is become politicized in order for it to become part of your value system, right? So don't eat meat for the climate because those are your values. That is, all of those are such powerful forces that I think combine to make it very, very hard for people to change. It's just not their taste. If you haven't eaten meat, and when I started eating red meat again, I thought it tasted terrible.
did you really?
And yeah, and also my body had lost, I think, some of the enzymatic pathways that I needed to digest it properly. So I felt a little sick and nauseated by eating meat. I had to start slowly. So, I think that we face a lot of obstacles to change. Anybody faces a lot of obstacles to changing the way they eat. Probably the people who have the easiest time are people who have some memory of living on a farm or growing up, or people who've been in rural America have some memory of the eggs and the bacon for breakfast, the kind of the naturalness of that kind of life. And so for them, sometimes I just get emails from people who'll be like, "Oh, yeah, what you said made such sense. And I remember this as a child, and I just flipped back to it. That's it. Lost 50 pounds, happy as could be." So, but I think for most people, and especially those with kind of progressive, liberal, or especially progressive values now in urban centers with zero connection to how food is grown or where it comes from, and no sympathy for rural America. Really, rural Americans are sort of um, the last folks against whom you can be somewhat bigoted, and that is that's no problem for the mainstream media to sort of I've seen a lot of articles that are really alienated from that rural life.
Right.
So it's very hard. It's extremely hard to change back to a way of eating that now a whole generation really just has no even touchstone. It's not a touchstone for them. They have no memory of it.
Yeah.
History. It's amazing how quickly people can become detached from their history. There's anybody under 35 really doesn't have any memory of a diet that once included eggs and whole milk. And I mean, maybe under 40, I think that they grew up just not even knowing those foods.
Yeah, it's strange. We do a thing with Anna on the Monday show. We just started doing this where she's bringing up foods that she'll ask me a question. Have you ever had this food? It's a new game we play.
Yeah.
Because someone, a friend of mine he talked about something called a devil dog. And I said, well, what's a devil dog? And he says, come on, don't pretend you don't know what a devil dog is. I said, his name is Don. I said, Don, I've never heard of a devil. And let me ask you, Nina, do you know what a devil dog is?
No.
Thank you. And
got me.
He even said, he lives in New York. And he said, well, maybe it's just a Northeast thing. And I said, well, what's a devil dog? It's no hot dog at all. It's kind of like a Little Debbie sponge cake of some sort. I've still not seen one, but it's a sponge cake. And we started talking about the devil dog. And I was like, well, I've never had one. So Anna has been taking on things that I've never had, right? Like we even got my mom on the phone once where we talked about whether or not I'd had a Pop-Tart. Now, it turns out I have had a Pop-Tart, but my mom says my brother and I tasted it and looked at her as if we were going to kill her. We were kids. And she said, I just never bought them again. I just thought I'd give them a try. Because we grew up on real food.
Right.
There was, we had a 5-acre vegetable garden and there was meat everywhere. I grew up out in the country. And so now we do it every week where she brings up a food, and some of them I don't recognize as being foods, right? That's just me. I'm 60 years old. I'm 59. I'm going to be 60 in a couple of months. And it's hard to believe that you're right. They have nothing to look back on. They've never had the bacon and eggs. They're kids who have grown up on cereal and milk.
Well, that was me too.
Really?
Yeah. We grew up on cereal and milk. My parents completely bought into that idea. Cocoa Puffs, Chocolate Krispies, whatever. We had terrible food growing up, and non-fat milk. And then for dinner, I think my mom regained her senses, and we had a sort of normal dinner time. But
Hang on, Nina. Wait, hang on. For breakfast, she would send you to school with
actually my favorite was Captain Crunch. So I used to have Captain Crunch and non-fat milk. And at one point, and then an article came out maybe when I was about 13 pointing out the the sugar content of these cereals. And those cereals, all my favorites were 50% sugar or something. So there was a weekend where that article came out and I locked everybody out of the house to eat all the cereals that remained because I knew that I would never get them again. But then we switched over to shredded wheat and Twix and these supposedly healthier cereals that, as you know, have just as high carbohydrate content, and all of that turns to sugar the moment you eat it. And I remember that I even tried to have that without the non-fat milk. I tried to have it with water because I wanted to save on any possible fat. Like I would have no fat enter my diet. So I would eat shredded wheat with water, which I just imagine, again, the power of the mind to convince yourself that that is a yummy, healthy breakfast that can send you off to school.
Adam Carolla told me once that his mom was like this crunchy granola type, and she gave him, I'm not making this up, I couldn't make this up, grape nuts with orange juice in it because milk was a bad thing. So did you have a weight problem as a kid? Were you chubby or?
No, not until I was just towards the end of high school. I started gaining weight because I also became very interested in baking. So I was constantly baking cookies and cakes and all sorts. So I started to gain weight then. But again, I remember going on a diet, and the diet was anything that did not have fat. So fish cooked in tin foil or parchment so that I wouldn't have fat on anything. And that was also when I stopped eating red meat, wouldn't eat butter, just wouldn't have anything that was at all fat. It was a non-fat diet, which of course made me fatter and always hungry. And that lasted for quite a while. That whole stage of just really getting heavy and miserable lasted for about a decade.
So between your senior year in high school, you're out of college now, you're in the workforce, and you're eating non-fat rice cakes, all this
rice cakes for dinner and salads for lunch. And then of course, like anybody, you are hungry. So unlike I can starve myself and smoke cigarettes wife, I didn't smoke and I couldn't starve myself. And so I did what pretty much everybody on this diet does eventually, is that you just binge on some kind of junk food to fill the hole inside your hungry body. But it's you feel like it's very hard to get out of that. Your mental state is sort of declining, and you really think you're doing the right thing. Every expert that you go to will tell you this is what you're doing is correct. Just do it with more discipline, be better at it. So So yeah, I mean, I think that's the story of a lot of people in America. When experts offer the explanation that the problem with Americans is that they eat too much junk food, and they say there's nothing wrong with our expert advice, it's that Americans have gone over to junk food heaven, and that's all they survive on. And there's some data to support that. We definitely eat more junk food than we did at the beginning of in the 19, before there was junk food, when in the first part of the 20th century. But the problem with that explanation is it doesn't answer really a couple of questions, which is, why do we eat so much more junk food? And there's, this theory that the writer Michael Moss came out with is, well, junk food is just so good and addicting. They've studied how to addict you. They know how to get you addicted to this food. And that's probably true, right? Yeah. But I will tell you, there's nothing more addictive than the homemade chocolate chip cookies and almond crescent cookies that my mom used to make for us. So it wasn't like there was no addictive, delicious, compulsive making food before it came along in an Oreo cookie. There was. And I think that the broader explanation is that Americans are trying to starve themselves. They're trying to survive on salads. They are being told to cut back on calories, and they do. And so they're trying to survive on insufficient calories and not enough filling foods. Of course, what provides satiety is protein and some fat. And so when they're starving, and in that, that's when they go for the junk food. It's irresistible. To a starving person, why I will never go shopping when I'm hungry. To a hungry person, junk food is just irresistible. So I think that's the explanation, or part of the explanation, for why we are a junk food nation. We're trying to get by on quinoa and salad, and we're just hungry. We're hungry for nutrients because we're not getting the nutrients that we need from those foods, and we're hungry from not eating enough calories.
I couldn't agree more. I was talking, again, going back to Dr. Drew, I was doing his show a couple of weeks ago. Have you ever done his show, Nina?
No.
I need to get you on you need to talk with Dr. Drew. One of the things I brought up was, we were talking about sugar, and I was talking about the addiction of sugar. And Drew is a medical addiction specialist, right? So he understands addiction. He's worked with people as heroin, cocaine, everything else, right? And I said, Drew, sugar will light up the brain. It's been shown in studies the same way as cocaine. And Drew went into a long, drawn out thing that I don't understand because I'm not a doctor. He goes, well, sugar does light up the brain, but it's not exactly the same mechanism by which heroin does it. Heroin does this and that and the other thing. And I said, you know what, Drew, you're right. I'm going to assume that you're 100% correct because I just don't know. But what I do know is we know that heroin is bad. We give sugar to kids at birthday parties and tell them it's okay. So, when I've always said to everyone, go, if you don't want to watch the whole movie. Anne Bancroft did a movie called Fatso. Have you ever seen Fatso?
I have not.
Watch the movie. If you want to laugh, Dom DeLuise is the star along with Anne Bancroft in a movie called Fatso, directed and produced by Anne Bancroft. And in the opening scene, it shows a baby crying, an Italian baby, right? Mm-hmm. And the mother's trying, and the baby won't stop crying. So the mom whips out a breast and puts the baby on the breast, and the baby stops crying. Now the baby's a toddler, and the baby won't stop crying. So the mommy hands the kid a candy bar. And then it does all of these quick takes of every time the baby grows up, adolescence, the girl turns him down for a date, he goes and eats a pizza, right? And on and on and on. And then the movie starts at the funeral where someone is being buried in something the size of a piano box, right? So, and Dom DeLuise is at the funeral crying, going, Sally was my favorite. Oh my God, I love Sally. and he's crying in the booth, and then he reaches in and pulls out a Snickers bar and starts eating, right? So the whole movie deals with Dom DeLuise trying to come to terms with obesity and all the things we do with diet, right? And how we try to make ourselves feel better with food. You know, that's the part that no one ever wants to talk about. You know, it's the elephant in the room. And, you know, I'm glad, you know, we've talked all these times. You've never brought it up. You've never talked about, you know, your problem with food. My issue with food is people always say, you're so passionate about this. Why? And it's like, because I have loved ones who are morbidly obese and they won't listen to me. They won't listen to anything. You know, their doctor says, my brother came back from the doctor. My brother, by the way, has exactly my frame. And when he played high school football, he was actually a better ball player than me. He looked like the statue of David. So he, as a human being, he looked like a tan version of the statue of David. Now he goes about 350 pounds, right? Wow. And he'll come back from a doctor and say, what did your doctor? Doctor says I'm in great shape. It's like, is your doctor fucking blind? I can look at you and tell you. He goes, well, he says, you know, he goes, yeah, I have my diabetes in check because you're taking a drug and your diabetes is still there. You know, you have a drug masking your diabetes, right? And he's got a stent in his heart now. He's 53. He's got a stent. It's like, does any of this sound healthy to you? Your A1Cs are off the charts, even with the medication. Your blood sugar is in the 400s and 500s, and you think it's okay. Your doctor thinks that's okay. I'm not buying it. I don't buy it, right?
Wow.
It's a problem.
I don't say. Sibling rivalry. I don't know. I think that, you know, if you're 350 pounds, that's a very difficult mindset to be in. I could not presume what it's like to be in that kind of, in that mind. You know, you have a lot of defenses if you think there is no problem and you're on a bunch of medications, and you know, there's a lot of backstory there. I mean, I know quite a few people who've lost over 100 pounds, over 200 pounds, and just the psychological, you know, the difficulty of that psychologically is, you know, is far beyond the original difficulty of, say, getting off your quote unquote addiction to sugar, changing the way that you eat, you know, really making dramatic changes in your diet is nothing compared to the psychological work you have to do to come down from this idea of, you know, to deal with the notion that everybody but your brother has been telling you something that's not true. Yeah. And you know, and then you have your whole identity in a different body, in a different body shape. You've lived your life in a different body shape. And so it's a very sensitive topic. I think it's very hard on people. So anyway, that's just to say, you know, I think that weight and body, all of that is extremely psychological, and you can't underestimate that component of it. But the people who approach this problem by saying, we have to address the psychology first. You have to learn to have a better relationship to your, you know, hypocaloric salads, and you have to deal with it by behavioral model of thinking about and valuing every bite you eat. I don't think that is necessarily the best approach, in the sense that if you can fix what you're eating, a lot of the neurosis just goes away. If you're not dealing with hunger, if you're satisfied, even if you eat your meal while you're watching TV and not thinking about it, but you're still full at the end, getting the right foods, getting enough nutrients in your body, getting your body what it needs really is it's like a platform for supporting your mind, and your mind just becomes a healthier hangout spot. And a lot of those problems go away. I mean, in many of these low carb experiments, I mean, anecdotally, I don't think it's been studied directly. People go off their antidepressants. They're just not feeling so depressed. I was on antidepressants and went off because you just no longer feel the level of anxiety. You are no longer as depressed. So in other words, good food is really the basis for better mental health.
Yeah,
and we're seeing that more and more now. There's a lot of research being poured into that particular, looking at that particular question. Some of it is astonishing. Some of it is like, can we reverse schizophrenia with a very low carb diet? Because there is one case study where they successfully did that, and nothing else has been able to reverse schizophrenia.
Who did that? Was that Georgia Eads or one of those, or do we know?
I believe it's a patient of Dr. Chris Palmer at Harvard, and he was diagnosed with schizophrenia for, I believe, over 30 years.
Wow.
And I've just read this best-selling book by Bob Kolker that was an Oprah book pick about the history of schizophrenia in this one particular family where it was 6 out of 12 children had schizophrenia. And so the book is wonderful, and it reviews the history of treatment of schizophrenia in the U.S., which is suspenseful in part, but really the bottom line is we still don't know how to treat or make really any inroads into schizophrenia. It's not really genetic, can't really find, genes, can't pinpoint the right genes, or there are too many genes to be involved as to make that a meaningful kind of diagnosis. And the drugs that we're using are the same ones that have been used for decades, and they basically cause heart disease.
Yeah.
And they help kind of numb the disease, but they don't do anything to actually reverse it. Anyway, it's really a sad story, and now there's some hope, like a tiny sliver of hope. But even if it turns out that is not, that's a false hope, I think that there's a growing body of literature or growing body of research now looking into this question, mental health and diet.
Yeah, it is. And Georgia Eads is also at Harvard. And I'm glad that
No, she's not anymore.
She's not there anymore?
No, she was at Smith College, but she's not there.
Okay. I didn't know. Thank you for correcting me on that.
No problem.
It's very sad. We never look at the addiction of food. It's good that they're learning, schizophrenia, but there's also an addiction component. And I know Robert Cyrus, who's been on this show, talks about it. Do you know Robert at all? Have you ever?
Yes, I do.
A lot of these guys are now talking about this, food as an addiction. And, the thing I do, since I don't really understand that much about the addiction, it's just not my thing, is whenever I take people, 400, 500, 600-pound people, it's what I'm seeing now in my little practice. I just tell them, eat all the fat you want. I don't care, just eat fat, eat all you want. Don't look at the calories, because I'm trying to get them to break the addiction of the carb. And then after we have that addiction under control, then we start monkeying with the calories. Okay, you're at 7,000 calories. Let's bring that down a bit, even though you were losing weight. Because it's almost like they're on a tightrope without a net, right? They're stuck. They don't know what to do. And we have to get them out of that. And that's always been my approach. I know other people say, oh, just, fast. Fast for weeks on end. It's like, well, you're asking someone with a food addiction to not eat food.
Right. I don't think that's that's not really sustainable.
Yeah. And how long can you not eat food? So, my approach is, let's just get you eating fat and protein. We're going to cut out one of the macronutrients. And once we have that under control, then we'll control how much of that you're eating. And by the way, they lose weight just doing that.
Yeah.
No matter what the calories are at first, they'll lose 50, 75, 100 pounds just doing that. But these are people that need to lose 300, 400 pounds, right? And that's what we're seeing.
That's a journey.
When I started helping people with weight loss in 1983, 84, if someone was 250, 275, that was like morbidly, that was a problem. Then I started seeing 300-pound people, and then 350, and then 400. Now it's not unusual to see 550. It's commonplace. You know, this is not going in the right direction. And it really bothers me. I sometimes I just feel like throwing my hands up and go, you know, screw it. Let me just go make money on vitamins and coffee and call it a day. You know, I don't need to be here anymore. I really do. You know, it's why are we doing any of it? I don't know why I have the passion anymore, but I do.
Well, you know, you see how people's lives are transformed, and you see, I'm sure you get a ton of gratitude for doing what you're doing. So that's hard to turn away from. I mean, not many people get to help people truly transform their lives.
You know, that
And
all sounds
that's a
good. You know,
privilege, right?
no, you could say that, but then you go on Twitter and, you know, people are telling me I'm a murderer and you're killing animals. And, you know, you sit there and you go, you know, Serena will say to me, and I go, why are you so cranky? It's like, go read my Twitter for one day. Just go one day, just go.
Right.
Go on one of those days when the vegans are really coming after me and go see. Go see. You know, it makes me wonder why I do any of it. You know, why can't I just move on? Drives me nuts.
Well, I mean, what can you say? There's, you know, we're in the midst of a kind of conflict where there are enormous vested interests, big food, big pharma. You know, there are very motivated vegans, animal rights activists. There's a lot of very strong vested interests, and it's not a pleasure always to be in this field
Right.
because you are the target of all kinds of campaigns and people who are angry at you and people who think you're killing people, and emotions really run high, and there's a lot of money floating around trying to undermine you and me. I think that you know, what can you do? Like I still feel like it's just a privilege to be able to transform people's lives, and I feel like there's an obligation to speak. There's a sort of moral obligation to stand up for the truth. There's, especially now, I mean, as painful as there's still a moral obligation to stand up, because there's nothing more that our foes would like than for us to stand down and to be an example to others not to stand up, you know, to be silent, to silence the voices that are out there speaking about this. So I think that's, you know, it's a little bit of an existential battle, but I just don't see, the people that I know are all in this field are all dealing with the same issue, and you know, they can't roll over because, you know, maybe when we're 80, Vinny, we'll be talking about this.
We probably will, but here's the question. You know, I don't know if, you know, I don't know if history is going to even look at a Vinny or a Nina and go, what were their contributions? You know, it's, you know, will they even look back and go, these guys were trying to do this back in 2022, right? They were
Right.
telling, because when you look back, you don't see much when, you know, you never hear Robert Atkins's name mentioned, and that was just in the 70s, you know, much less, you know, Banting, who tried to make a difference. And I'm trying to think of the guy in the 1950s and 60s from England who was saying sugar. What was his name?
Oh, Yudkin, John Yudkin.
John Yudkin. You know, so if we're not talking about those guys and people don't remember those guys, what's the chances that they're going to remember a Nina or a Taubes or a Vinny or any of us?
You know, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I just think you have to be right with doing what you're doing in your own moment. And by the way, we do mention John Yudkin, and Banting is living on. To eat a low carb diet is called to bant in South Africa.
Yeah.
And at the Atkins, you know, the Atkins diet is still one of the names that people recognize and will talk about and is used in the scientific literature. So I think who knows when history will finally be written on this in a way that seems to get some of the science right. But I think the point, Vinnie, is just to do what what is right in your moment when you're not repairing or building your kayak or whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah, and look, we were talking about this off the air. People, we crowdfunded the first movie, so I was obligated to do it, and I did, and the movie did really well, and all the money came back, and I didn't feel like it was my money because it was given to me by other people, $5 at a time, but it was their money. And since it would have been really, really, really hard for me to go find all those people and say, thank you, here's your money back. I said, you know what? I bet you they would like a second movie. So I did the second movie, and then the money came back again. I keep trying to give it away, Nina. And now I'm doing the third movie. And as I tell everyone, if the money doesn't come back, I'm out of the movie business. And by the way, I don't care.
You can get in the kayak business then.
Yeah, I can make $20,000 kayaks. You know the reason I'm making. Do you know the story behind the kayak and why?
I don't actually. No.
I'll tell you.
I've just seen the pictures.
Well, it's coming along just fine, and I'll send you some. I'll send you some. I'll text you some pictures later. I kayak, right? I love kayaking, and I sea kayaking, and now I'm in rivers and everything else. And I've always wanted one of these great cedar strip kayaks. They're beautiful. Even when you see them up on someone's car or you see them out in the water, you very rarely see them. And I started talking to some of the best builders in the world. And the best, the one that is in the Museum of Modern Art, which was done by Guillemot Kayaks and Nick Shada. For him to build it's a $40,000 kayak. Mm-hmm. And I started talking to this other guy, Joey Schott over at Turning Point Boats. And I said, Joey, to build a museum quality kayak, what would you charge? And he goes, $25,000. And I said, cedar is just not that expensive. What's costing all the money? And he said, it's the labor, it's the time, it's painstaking. And when he said that, I got interested. And I said, can a guy like me that's never really worked, I'm good with my hands, I'm good with tools, I'm good with that. Can a guy like me learn how to woodwork and do this? And he said, absolutely, come over to my shop and you can build your own kayak. So we're documenting the number of hours it's taking for an average person to build a kayak. And I could not be happier.
That's great.
Yeah, it's just a wonderful thing that I'm doing. And by the way, when I'm done with it, I'm going to throw it in the water and I'm going to beat it up. I'm going to do everything you could do to it. It will not be hanging on a wall in my garage.
Right.
It will be used. And
that sounds great. Doing something with your hands, doing something different than sitting at a computer, all of that sounds pretty heavenly. And also just to be in a totally different zone with your mind is really, really incredibly important.
Yeah. No, it is. I like, I like tinkering. I've always been into tinkering, and I go out, I shoot skeet and do all this stuff. I go out almost every day and shoot skeet. And I just needed something else. I needed to do something. And it was build a kayak. So that's what I'm doing. Nina, as always, we never got into any part of what we were supposed to talk about today, which is great because we can save it for next time.
Well, Vinnie, it's always fun to go meandering around on different topics with you. And just a pleasure to be here. So we'll do that. We'll keep the list and we'll save it for next time.
Hang on, I want to say goodbye to you off the air. Folks, I didn't mention by accident our sponsor, Villa Capelli. Villa Capelli Olive Oil is the longest running sponsor of this show. I love Villa Capelli around here. It's the good stuff. Go get it. There's 3 ways to save over at Villa Capelli. Number 1, get the 3-liter tin because when you buy more, it's cheaper. Number 2, if you spend over $100 after the Vinnie discount, you get free shipping. And number 3, 10% discount by putting my name in, Vinnie, Vinnie, promo code Vinnie, no wimpy Y on that, and you will save 10%. Of course, you know all the other stuff. Before you go to Amazon, go to VinnieTortorich.com, click through the banner. And also we have a super fan page. You can find Nina Teicholz. Nina, you have the Nutrition Coalition. What else is going on over there?
I'm going to start a Substack newsletter pretty soon. So you can keep an eye out for that. That's the main thing I'm going to be launching soon. And I'm stepping down from the Nutrition Coalition. So we'll have we'll have a new president there very soon. So I'm moving back into doing more writing and journalism, and I have a second book underway that I'm working on. So I'm just going back to doing more writing. More writing, maybe kayaking. Who knows?
I love hearing that. I really do. Folks, on behalf of Nina Teicholz, my name is Vinnie Tortorich. Put life into living.